The ruling by Britain's highest court that the suspension of the UK Parliament wasn't legal saw a brief bounce for the pound sterling. It rallied to almost $1.25 as traders considered the possibility that Britain could avoid a no-deal Brexit on October the 31st. Speaking to reporters in New York, where he's attending the UN General Assembly, Mr. Johnson said that he'll respect the Supreme Court ruling.
A stunning development from the Supreme Court has sent shockwaves through British politics, shaking the Labour Party to its core and raising serious questions about the country's democratic framework. In what is already being described as one of the most significant legal rulings in recent UK history, the Supreme Court has delivered a devastating verdict against Keir Starmer's leadership. The judgment exposed a covert strategy aimed at aligning the UK with European Union laws, executed without parliamentary approval, public awareness, or democratic consent. Legal analysts have characterized the ruling as harsh and unyielding. While Starmer's public messaging emphasized pragmatism, stability, and economic partnership, the court unveiled a far more troubling picture. Behind closed doors, his government had begun integrating EU-aligned policies, engaging in secret negotiations to craft provisional deals, completely bypassing both Parliament and the public. These backdoor agreements were not minor administrative changes. They were major shifts in national policy, effectively attempting to reverse Brexit without public debate or legal mandate. The court's verdict was uncompromising. It declared that Starmer's use of executive powers constituted an egregious overreach, a direct assault on constitutional norms and democratic values. The judges insisted that any significant redefinition of UK sovereignty, especially of this magnitude, must be openly debated and ratified by Parliament. By sidestepping that process, Starmer's administration acted unlawfully and, as the court put it, morally indefensible. This ruling is politically devastating for a leader who built his public image on transparency, legality, and respect for democratic institutions. The case, originally brought forward by constitutional watchdog groups with backing from pro-Brexit advocates, has pulled back the curtain on a quiet yet sweeping EU realignment initiative, escalating the crisis. Now engulfing Starmer's leadership, the court determined that these actions breached post-Brexit statutory obligations and disregarded the will of the 2016 referendum. More than just a failed policy, the verdict has exposed what critics are calling a shadow rejoin strategy, a deliberate, concealed effort to tether the UK back to the EU under the pretext of regulatory streamlining. Political backlash was immediate and intense. Nigel Farage hailed the decision as a turning point for British democracy, accusing Starmer of deceiving the public and urging him to step down. Reform UK echoed the sentiment, accusing Labour of operating in secrecy to override the public's will. Even the Conservative Party, despite their own tangled Brexit history, seized the moment. A prominent Tory MP branded Starmer as a rogue operator in a lawyer's robe, accusing him of treating constitutional safeguards as mere obstacles to be circumvented. But perhaps the most destabilizing blow came from within Starmer's own ranks. Labour HQ reportedly plunged into chaos as details of the ruling emerged. Internal leaks have stoked leadership speculation and worsened an already deepening crisis. Sources indicate that even some senior members of Starmer's shadow cabinet were unaware of the full scope of the EU alignment scheme. Insiders say they were given carefully tailored messaging focused on bridge building and raising regulatory standards in Europe, but were never told about signed provisional agreements or planned legislation designed to replicate EU policies. MPs representing constituencies that strongly supported Brexit reacted with fury. One called the strategy political suicide, while another described it as a monumental betrayal. Several MPs believe they were deliberately kept uninformed to prevent internal revolt. In response, Labour's communication team scrambled to contain the fallout, issuing statements downplaying the ruling as a simple legal clarification rather than a judicial rebuke. That narrative quickly collapsed when legal analysts highlighted the court's severe language, emphasizing this was not a minor misstep, but a foundational breakdown in governance. The ruling has triggered sweeping calls across Westminster for a full-scale investigation into the secretive EU alignment process. Conservative MPs are now demanding the release of all communications between Starmer's office and EU officials. Some are calling for parliamentary committees to subpoena Shadow, cabinet members to testify under oath. One MP has gone so far as to propose a vote of no confidence, not necessarily to oust Starmer immediately, but to force Labour to defend a now illegal policy in open debate. The irony is striking. Starmer, who built his brand on precise legal conduct and upholding democratic traditions, now stands accused of violating the very ideals he once vowed to protect. At the same time, investigative journalists have ramped up their efforts, probing deeper into when the covert negotiations began, who authorized them, and how deeply they penetrated the party's top leadership. Names of senior advisors are beginning to emerge, many with long-standing connections to the EU and clear ideological opposition to Brexit. What began as a legal issue has now spiraled into a full-fledged political scandal with the potential to reshape the trajectory of British politics in the months ahead. With mounting pressure for a general election, Starmer, once viewed as a competent leader in turbulent times, now finds himself at the center of a full-blown political crisis. While the Supreme Court has spoken on the legality, the political consequences are only beginning to play out. What began as a courtroom battle has escalated into an inferno threatening not just Starmer's leadership, but the Labour Party's stability. As tensions escalate, Labour's leadership finds itself fractured, with infighting and blame spreading rapidly. Starmer, once heralded as the technocratic figure who would restore order after years of chaos, is now accused of exploiting executive powers to discreetly pull Britain back toward EU structures, without debate, consent, or regard for the Brexit mandate. Fueling the fire, confidential memos and strategic documents have been leaked and are now circulating widely among media outlets and opposition figures. These explosive revelations have worsened the scandal, throwing more fuel onto an already out-of-control crisis that could redefine British politics for years to come. Insiders confirm that Starmer wasn't simply aware of the EU alignment plan. He was actively steering it. A leaked document titled Confidential Strategy Roadmap outlined a plan to restore EU regulatory convergence disguised as trade cooperation. The memo advised using non-legislative tactics to sidestep parliamentary involvement, reduce media scrutiny, and minimize political risk. It referenced terms like framework reintegration and regulatory alignment repeatedly and bore the initials of Starmer's top advisors. These disclosures make clear that the alignment effort was deliberate, extensive, and centrally directed by the Labour leadership, plunging the party and perhaps the nation into a storm of political reckoning. Critics' darkest suspicions have now been confirmed. This wasn't a case of misguided policy drift, but a deliberate attempt to circumvent democratic procedures. Labour MPs, especially those representing Leave voting areas, responded with outrage. Emergency meetings were convened, and several frontbenchers even threatened to step down unless full transparency was provided. One senior MP described the internal atmosphere as volcanic, while another bluntly stated, "We assured our voters we would uphold Brexit. Now it looks like we've betrayed them." This could lose us the general election. Deputy Leader Angela Rayner reportedly warned during a tense behind-closed-doors meeting. She is said to have confronted Starmer directly, demanding answers on how such a major policy initiative was allowed to advance without proper oversight or consultation. While official remarks from Rayner's office have been carefully measured, insiders claim she feels personally undermined, viewing the hidden EU alignment strategy as a Blair-era-style power grab that severely damaged her credibility with Labour's working-class base and grassroots members. The growing chasm between Labour's technocratic leadership and its working-class faction is quickly turning into a dangerous internal rift. Rayner now stands at a crossroads: stay loyal to Starmer and absorb the political blowback, or distance herself in an attempt to protect her own future leadership chances. Meanwhile, external attacks are intensifying. Nigel Farage, speaking on GB News and across various social media platforms, declared the court ruling as evidence of an establishment plot to drag Britain back under Brussels' influence. Reform UK swiftly launched an aggressive ad campaign, accusing Starmer of betraying the Brexit mandate. Conservative ministers wasted no time exploiting Labour's unravelling crisis, repeatedly hammering home the message that Labour had been caught trying to secretly rewrite Britain's future. Constitutional scholars stress the historic nature of the Supreme Court's decision, emphasizing that it firmly establishes a legal precedent. No government can enter major international agreements, especially those that affect national sovereignty, without full parliamentary scrutiny and consent. The judgment not only dismantled Starmer's covert EU strategy, but also restricted future prime ministers from employing similar tactics, reasserting Parliament's supremacy while simultaneously humiliating Labour's leadership. As the scandal widened, whistleblowers began to emerge. One former Labour advisor described a paranoid, highly secretive environment focused on managing appearances and terrified of leaks. Staff were reportedly told to use vague euphemisms and coded language when referring to EU reintegration, deliberately hiding key details from both Parliament and the public to avoid detection. Instructions were even given to avoid creating any written records, ensuring sensitive political plans wouldn't be traceable. Insiders say that internal warnings about public backlash to rejoining EU norms were consistently ignored. Public consultation, according to these sources, was viewed not as a democratic obligation, but as a political liability that had to be avoided at all costs. Now, with the general election fast approaching, Labour's once powerful momentum has come to a screeching halt. What was intended to be Starmer's crowning moment could now mark the beginning of his political downfall. His carefully built image as a cautious and capable leader is disintegrating, replaced with that of a man exposed for orchestrating a constitutional subversion. Journalists have begun filing freedom of information requests to uncover Labour's secret dealings with EU officials over the past 18 months. Rumors are swirling that more damaging leaks could surface soon, possibly from within Starmer's own inner circle. With every breaking story, Labour's political crisis grows deeper, and every press conference and public appearance is overshadowed by one damning question. Can Starmer weather this storm? Can Keir Starmer still be trusted? This controversy now transcends policy debates. It cuts straight to the heart of principle and democratic responsibility. While the Supreme Court stopped Starmer's legal maneuvering, it simultaneously ignited a political reckoning that may permanently alter the UK's political landscape. Starmer's grip on leadership is slipping as Labour teeters on the edge of a crisis entirely of its own making. Media outlets scream headlines filled with accusations of betrayal, secrecy, and constitutional violations. On-air political panels are now aligning legal scholars, commentators, civil servants, and disillusioned voters in rare agreement. This wasn't a case of poor judgment. It was a calculated, deliberate effort to bypass democracy. Inside number 10. Desperate efforts to contain the situation are rapidly collapsing. Reports of internal discontent are escalating as backbench Labour MPs quietly begin organising behind the scenes, preparing for what could become a full-blown leadership showdown. This political inferno shows no signs of slowing. Starmer's leadership and the future of the Labour Party now hang in the balance. Informal crisis meetings have intensified, with MPs openly considering a potential vote of no confidence. Quiet discussions about an emergency leadership challenge have started gaining traction. Prominent names such as Wes Streeting, Lisa Nandy, and even Deputy Leader Angela Rayner are now being mentioned as possible successors. Rayner, according to multiple sources, is seriously weighing whether to publicly break ranks before it becomes too politically costly to remain silent. While no formal leadership challenge has yet been initiated, the situation is fluid, and the party's stability grows shakier with each passing hour. The warning signs were undeniable. Starmer's hold on the Labour Party was unraveling rapidly. A growing number of MPs voiced their dissatisfaction publicly, revealing the widening internal divisions. Starmer's closest allies attempted to maintain an image of cohesion, but the visible fractures only weakened their credibility, especially as public anger continued to intensify. At the same time, investigative journalists exposed even more alarming developments. Multiple undisclosed meetings between Labour officials and EU representatives had allegedly taken place, not in official government venues, but in discreet European hotels and embassies far removed from parliamentary oversight. It was in these private settings that sensitive discussions reportedly unfolded away from public view. These covert talks centered on aligning environmental standards, reinstating mutual recognition agreements, and syncing digital regulations, all couched as technical updates, yet clearly structured to bring British law back under EU legal sway. One of the most damaging findings was the revelation of a plan for the UK to rejoin an EU regulatory body under the misleading label of Strategic Observer, a role that would demand total compliance with EU rules without formally re-entering. The blueprint seemed deliberately crafted to avoid triggering political accountability or public discourse. But these secret dealings pointed to something even more concerning. This wasn't a mere oversight or isolated lapse, but a well-orchestrated and systemic effort. The involvement of top civil servants, former EU legal advisors, and key departmental Figures unveiled a deeply entrenched pro-EU network within the government, actively working to sidestep both Brexit and Parliament's authority. As scrutiny intensified, Starmer was finally compelled to address the nation in an urgently scheduled press briefing. Reading directly from a pre-written script, he denied any misconduct, an approach that only stoked more outrage. He insisted the initiative was solely meant to safeguard British jobs and then refused to answer follow-up questions. His delivery was widely condemned as cold, evasive, and completely out of touch with the political gravity of the moment. The internet exploded. One viral comment summed up the public mood. He lied! He got exposed! Now he's acting like nothing's wrong. The consequences soon spilled into electoral reality. Labour's once solid poll lead collapsed overnight as swing voters in red wall districts turned away. Reform UK surged in popularity, with Nigel Farage launching a national campaign accusing the political elite of orchestrating a secret deal to rejoin the EU. Petitions gathered steam, protests were announced, and grassroots donations surged. Inside Labour headquarters, panic set in. Staff pulled all-nighters, erasing digital records, performing security sweeps, and reassessing legal risks. Senior advisors began discreetly preparing resignation letters, hoping to distance themselves from the unraveling scandal. But each rushed attempt at damage control only fueled public skepticism, making the situation seem even more like a cover-up. The key question across Westminster was no longer whether Starmer could bounce back, but whether he could make it through. The month without a full-blown mutiny. Former Brexit Secretary David Frost delivered a scathing address, calling the Supreme Court's ruling a defining moment in British politics and accusing Starmer of bypassing Parliament and ignoring the people. His remarks, widely broadcast, added fuel to an already raging fire and elevated the scandal's significance. Even traditional Labour sympathizers started backing away. The Guardian published a carefully worded but critical editorial. Longtime leftist loyalists called for full transparency. Momentum issued a blistering statement accusing Starmer of undermining democratic values. Trade unions began demanding internal reviews. Within the party, Starmer's typically composed demeanor began to unravel. Once praised for his legal rigor, he now appeared increasingly defensive, isolated, and suspicious. As the scandal intensified and pressure closed in from every direction, the collapse of his leadership seemed not just possible, but imminent.